How the worst week of my life became the best week of my life, part 3. So I started this series about 1.5 years ago, or maybe more, and I never did the part 3. And then recently somebody asked me about my awakening or what happened to me back in 1997. And so I thought, okay, well, I guess this is time to make the 3rd video. If you're interested in this whole story, how this all played out for me, this by far the biggest shift that ever happened to me in my entire life, and turning my life and the universe inside and out and changing my experience of everything permanently. You might want to start with the 1st and 2nd installment. I'll put them in the comments, or not in comments. I'll put them under the description of this video. So I'll very briefly recap what I talked about in the last video. After a very difficult period in my life, I picked up this book called The 3 Pillars of Zen, and read a couple specific parts of it that demonstrated to me in a very direct way what Buddhism was actually, or what Buddha was actually trying to say, what he was really talking about, what he was pointing to. And what he was pointing to wasn't doctrine, and it wasn't some philosophy, and it wasn't what I perceived Buddhism was about up until that point. I had learned some about it. It was pointing to a possibility for me right now, not later, not in another lifetime, not in 100 lifetimes, not a way to be a better person, not a way to follow an Eightfold Noble Path. It was a way to address the fundamental issue of suffering that I had been locked into my entire life, in my head and thoughts, and the constant sense of suffering. So anyway, this book has a couple of chapters. I talked about this thoroughly in the last video, that I was able to read the exchanges between a Zen master and students who were going through this exact shift, and the instructions that were given. So I discerned it. I discerned what was being pointed to, and something started opening up for me. I could tell, like, oh, this is working. I get this. I know this. This is instinctually obvious. I've always wanted to go here. This is what I've always been trying to do, and not even knowing I'm trying to do it. Nobody talks about this. No one's told me about it. It's even hidden in plain sight. It's hidden inside Buddhism, apparently. So once I got it, once I picked it up, I could catch the scent. I was on its trail. I did not deviate. That's the one-pointed approach. I talk about it pretty in depth in the last video. And that culminated in this experience of my sense of being me, my sense of consciousness, my sense of thought, and the experience of where thought appears, and the sense of being the thinker and being the one that has always been stuck in that mind, trying to figure its way through life, but life being a bunch of thoughts and beliefs about itself. All of that misery, all of a sudden it just looked so completely different. A simple way of saying it is it all melted together. It was almost like a pot of melting chocolate or something. If you think of all the little pieces of chocolate, a little figure that looks like me, and a figure that looks like my parents, and figures that look like other people, and figures that look like events, and all this stuff is just all seeming like this real set of experiences and circumstances and people and events and thoughts and past and future. And it seemed all distinct from other parts of it, and confusing and disorienting. And this was my life up until this point. And then it just kind of melted. Like if you just imagine it all melting into one big liquid pool of chocolate. That's really what happened inside my experience of me. My experience of me just melted into this experience of, I didn't have a word for it. I didn't label it. Now I would call it consciousness, but it was very obvious. And it wasn't like me going, oh, cool, this is consciousness. The sense of me became melted into that. Like it all just melted into one. And it was one seamless experience of pure aliveness. I don't even know. But again, there was no one in there thinking aliveness. Oh, it's aliveness. Oh, it's this, it's that. That whole apparatus itself melted into it. So it was just this pure, it was almost like pure light, actually. Light was I had a sense of that, although the thoughts actually stopped. At some point, the thoughts completely subsided. But the experience was clear. That was one very fascinating thing about this is there were no thoughts anymore. There was no trying to define reality by thought or who I am or where I'm going or what's happening right now. All of that subsided. But what remained was like the substratum of thought. the consciousness, the substratum of me, the substratum of everything I'd ever thought, everything I'd ever thought I was, everything I ever doubted. It was all the same stuff. It was all this substratum of awakeness, but it was kind of like light. In that light can shine onto something. Like if you have a flashlight, you can shine light onto an object. And that's how my mind used to operate. Like everything was an object. I was like looking around through different thoughts and beliefs and ideas and people and situations, all of which were made out of thought, and I didn't realize it. And all of a sudden, instead of the light being focused like a beam onto one object at a time, frantically trying to focus the right way, all of a sudden, everything was light. All the objects themselves were light. The light was shining inward into itself. It was infinitely illuminating in all directions, and I was that. But it was so clear and clean and homogeneous that I had no sense of I being that even. It was just light. It was just like pure experience of light, consciousness, knowingness. These words ring true to some degree, but the direct experience of it is way beyond any word, for sure, right? And there are many things that were self-validating and immediately obvious about it. One is it's the most natural state. Or at least at that point, I thought it was definitely the most natural state, far more natural than any thought I'd ever had, more natural than any belief about myself and my past and future and other people and where I stood and what my problems were. All of that was like the shadow of what I'm finally experiencing now. I realized I had always been in the shadows and now I'm in the light. Like the shadows were all those thoughts. I was lost in shadows. I was lost in a house of mirrors, and suddenly I'm out of the house of mirrors and there's just the light, the illumination. And it was experienced so thoroughly, so seamlessly, and so enjoyable. It was so enjoyable, and it was also neutral in a very distinct way. It wasn't like good or bad, right? That's thought. And I could see that now. It wasn't good or bad. It wasn't big or little. It wasn't awake or asleep. It was just completely aware or completely conscious. So there was a neutrality, but a very deep enjoyment of the neutrality. There was nothing boring about it, nothing stagnant about it. It was so clear, so beautiful, so crystalline, very much oceanic. And that was the initial awakening. That was the initial insight. And I didn't stop and go, oh, here's the initial insight, here's the awakening. There was no need to reflect on anything. There was no need to reflect on what's happening. That was gone. It was melted into the whole pot of consciousness, the whole pot of chocolate. So there was no sense of like, oh, this is a shift, this is an awakening. No. I wouldn't have cared about that. I wouldn't have cared to even construct that thought because the thoughts are so unreal. They're shadows. And I finally found the light. I am the light. I am in the light. Why would I cast shadows? Why would I do that? So there was no need to think, no interest in thought. There's this beautiful, pure experience of just being conscious, knowing that this is the most natural experience, knowing it's always been there, but I had been overlooking it without realizing it. I'd been actively overlooking it, looking for other things, looking for the next thought, looking for a way to feel better, even looking for spiritual ways to feel better. All of that now was seen to be nothing but thoughts. So an important part of this, as I talked about in the last two videos, is that there was something very important about the way I perceived thought that changed very significantly, that I wasn't believing thoughts. So maybe I could say what underlaid, I don't know what the word for that. This whole shift could be a fundamental shift in the way I perceived thought. That I stopped believing any thought, including a thought about what's happening right now, including any thought of a label of experience. It's just gone, all gone. And this kind of shows you why at some point, all spiritual concepts have to go out the window. And there are very good ways of pointing to this, like, Neo-Advaita or something like that. It's pretty good at pointing to this because it takes away all the concepts. It takes away all the spiritual seeking, all the materialism, all the sense of the self trying to find something. All of that is thought, clearly gone, right? There was no interest in constructing that anymore because there was just the experience of pure aliveness, pure being. And I can't say there were zero thoughts, but if there were, they were very, very scarce. But there was definitely an impression, and it was something like, oh, this is so enjoyable. I will do this the rest of my life. Like, I'll do what I need to do to pay the bills or keep myself healthy or go to work or whatever. But when I have free time, I will do this all the time because it's so enjoyable. And everything else is just some iteration of this. Everything else is is a kind of shadow of this. It's so clear, so pristine and beautiful. And it felt so good. And it happened pretty quickly, like that. The shift into the completeness of it, into the purity of it, into the oceanic nature of it, it's a little hard to tell because there was not even keeping time, but it seemed pretty quick, like within a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or a half an hour or something. But it was kind of like, boom, it's clear, it's obvious. And I've talked about this in so many ways, but one way I've described it is as self-validating. Now, if anyone hasn't read my book, I describe this in my book probably in more detail than anywhere else because I took the time to write it out in great detail of what the shift actually was like and the subtle insights. But one thing is that it is self-validating. It's just obvious. You don't need to confirm it with somebody. You need to go find a Zen teacher to see, did I have an awakening or is this real? It's so real. You don't, it's more real than real. It's obvious. That's one thing. And another thing is that it's something that feels like a memory, but I want to be really clear on this. Not everybody has said this who's gone through this shift, but I've heard it a number of times that they'll say something like, I remember this from being a young child, like very young. My experience of that is, it is true, but it's like remembering what it's like before you had memories. Remembering what it's like to be purely conscious without memories. So is it a memory? I'm not really sure if you could call it a memory in the traditional way, but there's a sense of familiarity and that like, yeah, I used to live in this when I was little kid, little. Something very familiar and almost ancient about it. And it also was clear to me that this is what everyone's seeking. Even if they think they're seeking other things, they're seeking this. They're seeking this because it's a full experience of being yourself. It's a full experience of being self without any fluctuations in thought or without any seeming divisions in your sense of self because of thought. Thought is very divisive, right? It's fracturing. It causes a fracturing experience of that sense of self. This is the pure experience of self, which it was clear to me everyone was trying to get back to that. I had always been trying to get back to it. I didn't even know it. So it was clear. It was like, oh yeah, this is like I've kind of achieved what everybody's looking for in a way. But it wasn't a sense of pride. It was just a sense of gratitude. Like, oh, okay. And the cost of that for me was suffering. Like it wasn't an easy path. It was a path of suffering, but the fruition of it was obvious. Yeah. So this was, I think in my book at the end of this description, I said, when I went to sleep that night, it was a peace I had never known. And it's true. The peace was so thorough. The peace and the lightness of this was so clear and so thorough that it was just so perfect. Still here. It's still here. Other things happened after this. Other shifts happened after this that I talk about, but this is the big one for sure. Everything else in a way is like nuances of what was realized in the first shift, pretty much, I think. And there can be big shifts after this too, but this is the one out of the illusion, really. The illusion making apparatus is not completely stopped at this point. There's still a lot of shadow material to deal with, but there's been a very real and very right shift out of the illusion into truth. And you know the experience of pure self with a capital S, the pure experience of I am. Many people experience it as the pure experience of consciousness being with no need to evaluate it with thought, define it with thought, grab onto a thought, make objects out of thought and chase the objects. Like none of that is necessary. And it's just this deep rest, deep peace, deep quietude. Yeah, and this is 20 some years ago, almost 30 years ago now. And it's still, just talking about it brings so much gratitude. And the insight is still here. I can sit and meditate in this experience of unbound consciousness easily, effortlessly, and it's so freeing. endlessly freeing, even though there's no one to be free anymore from it, from anything. It's gone. All of that's gone. And that's like later shifts, but the freedom is still just there. The peace is still just there. It's so beautiful. That's what I call the first awakening, or Kensho awakening for me, in my experience. So, some of what was recognized wasn't obvious until like I got up and moved through the world. Just sitting, it was just, again, pure, clear, peaceful, neutral, but fascinating in some simple way. Being it was enough. Being it was more than enough. Being it was all I'd ever wanted. And I had no idea that was the case. And I would have never known until I was actually dropped back into it, so to speak. So that was obvious in just sitting with no thought required. Now, what I did notice, though, when I got up and moved, went out into the world and went to work and things like that, I noticed big changes. So one big change that I've talked about many times is there was the sense that there was a weight that I had been carrying around, almost like I'd been dragging a chain with a ball on the chain all through my life. Everywhere I went was heavy and difficult, and it wasn't just pulling something, it was also pushing, like hesitation and pushing against myself. And just sometimes I thought about it like wading through molasses, like trying to walk through a pool of molasses or something. It's just heavy. And I didn't realize how heavy that was. I knew I was suffering, but I didn't realize how heavy that was until it was gone. So when I got up and moved through life, it was like, oh God, it's just so fluid. Everything's so easy, so simple, so effortless. Effort was effortless. There was no problems. I didn't construct problems. I could see the mind saying, oh, there's a problem. But it was like, oh, there's a thought. And the thought's gone. And now it's gone. I wouldn't even have to have a thought saying there's no problem. It's just that the thought that said there's a problem was seen as a thought, and it's gone and dispelled, and there's just clarity, simple, free movement, peace, freedom. And I noticed that immediately, again, by engaging in life and engaging in the world. Moving through life, I felt this weight had just disappeared. And this fluidity of experience, and this, God, there's so much nuance to this that I could probably just talk about it forever, but it just keeps coming. Like, another nuance is that I didn't realize how big of a deal it would be. I had no idea how big of a deal it would be that there was nothing to solve. There was no problem to solve, obviously. And in the past, without even noticing it, without even noticing it as such, I was always trying to solve a problem. The problem of me, the problem of life, the problem of problems, the problem of struggle, the problem of emotions. Most people live this way. I see it. I hear what they talk about. Like, most people live in this mode all the time. It's really tragic and unfortunate, but it's not necessary. I didn't know it was not necessary until I shifted out of it. Then it was like, oh, shit. There's nothing to fix or solve at all. No sense of having to fix or solve anything. So it freed up so much energy in a way. But I wasn't like overcharged. I just didn't have to waste energy. And that freed up energy, it was creativity. Then there was this fun. Then I could just have fun. Then life became way more fun. Way more fun than I'd ever had. Everything was fun. Being serious was fun. Being stupid was fun. Being silly was fun. Play was fun. Work was fun. It didn't matter what I was doing. There's something just enjoyable when there's nothing to solve. There's no problem to solve. That was a very, very important insight in this whole thing. And again, every time I say this, it's like, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important to say this, that I also wasn't even reflecting on that. Like, it was just flow. It was flow. There was no need to reflect on, oh, wow, there's no problems. I knew there was no problems. Of course there was, never could be. There was some reflection on it. There was some like, wow, God, I used to really stress about things. Why did I do that? It's so weird, like, it's just not here. There's no reason for that. And I could see there was no reason to. Things still happened all the time, but I wasn't struggling, and I wasn't forcing things to happen. I wasn't avoiding things happening. It was just flow. So that's how that's part 3 of how the worst part of my life became the best part of my life. The worst week of my life became the best week of my life. And that went on for some time. as you've heard me talk about, there's this honeymoon period. I'm talking about the honeymoon period. It was really beautiful. That access to unbound consciousness has always been there, though. But the sense of constant flow and peace and equanimity and all that fluctuated. After a while, it started to fluctuate because the shadow stuff started coming and working through that and all that, which I've talked about a million times too, and it's very important. But yet there was always this spaciousness that had been opened up. The insight didn't go anywhere. The insight was still there. That actually there still were no problems, even when there was an intense feeling of contraction or energetic sense of wanting to get away from my experience and, a resistance to an emotion. Like that stuff would come up and it was intense, but I knew there was nothing I needed to do about it. I knew it wasn't a problem. There's nothing to solve. I knew I was fundamentally free. I knew I had access to this unbound consciousness if I would take the time to sit, stop, and meditate. And often even when I wasn't meditating. So yeah, that was it. And then, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to talk about any other shifts in this series, but that's the big one that started it all. got the ball rolling, set the groundwork for everything else. But again, it's also a direct, clear, full recognition of the nature of reality being fundamentally free, unbound, unconditioned, unfettered.